Daniel Ricciardo's return to the grid after the hand injury wasn't impressive even after the disqualification of Hamilton and Leclerc due to breaching the floor regulations. So it begs the question, did AlphaTauri or Red Bull better made a mistake in sacking Liam Lawson for next year? The popular Honeybadger was harsh on himself, but the reality is that with Tsunoda getting the highest finish for the team this season, could Ricciardo fall even further back the pecking order? In his first Formula One race after recovering from a broken hand, Daniel Ricciardo experienced a disastrous race to say the least at the United States Grand Prix. Despite an impressive start from the 15th position, he managed to climb to 10th place and even reached as high as 7th due to strategic pit stops and early retirements around him. However, this proved to be the highlight for the experienced driver as he ultimately finished 17th, securing the last position among the drivers who completed the race. AlphaTauri opted for a very late pit stop for Ricciardo, which inadvertently impeded Lewis Hamilton's late pursuit of Max Verstappen for the race victory. Consequently, AlphaTauri's one-stop strategy did not yield the desired result for Ricciardo. But look, it wouldn't be fair to assess Daniel Ricciardo's Formula One comeback with AlphaTauri based solely on his first 3 races back. He spent 8 months on the sidelines, had to adapt to a new car and work on rebuilding his confidence after a challenging stint with McLaren, so these races can be viewed as a warm-up phase. Given his recent injury, it's clear that Ricciardo will require some additional time to regain his form as he's essentially starting his F1 return from square one. However, it's important to note that the context has changed because during Ricciardo's absence, his replacement Liam Lawson not only scored points but also occasionally outperformed his teammate Yuki Tsunoda, despite having no prior F1 race experience, and Ricciardo is evidently conscious of this fact. This was evident in the way he paused and carefully chose his words when discussing AlphaTauri's upgrades, emphasizing that he still doesn't feel completely up to speed in F1, even with the improvements made to the car since his last time behind the wheel. "I'm expecting a car that is a little stronger than where I left it," he said, "but it's going to be the 3rd race I've done this year, so I'm still very green for this season. But in saying that, I'm not using that as an excuse, but yeah, everything kind of still feels new to me." Upon his F1 return, now resumed after a hand injury forced him to miss the last 5 Grand Prix, he's found he's lacking that staple of his racing legacy, racecraft. Ricciardo started the Austin sprint race in 10th place, but he found himself 12th coming out of turn 1. A back-and-forth battle with Lance Stroll to hold on to that 12th place followed, something that was decided both by Ricciardo overtaking the Aston Martin around the outside of turn 1 and Stroll's brake problem becoming terminal. The pass on Stroll was vintage, late on the brakes Ricciardo, but he felt his racecraft earlier let him down. "I would say there were definitely some pros and cons," Ricciardo said after the sprint. "The pros was it was fun, I just really enjoyed being back on the grid. It's probably always my favorite feeling on a race weekend when the lights slowly all turn on and then off. That adrenaline spike, it's hard to get that in many other things in life. That was really enjoyable, but some little bits of, I don't like to be saying it because I'm very experienced, this year I'm not so experienced, but a bit of race rust. Things that deep down I should know better, but it's a good warm-up race for tomorrow and plenty to dissect." So, is Ricciardo right to be critical? How much did his rustiness cost him, and did injury symptoms play any role? Navigating the first lap at Austin is always a challenge, as those positioning their cars on the outside of turn 1 risk either being pushed off the track on the exit or making contact at the entry point, and in retrospect opting for the outside line into the corner proved to be the wiser choice. Ricciardo had a moment to adjust his line when it became apparent that those on the inside would be closely packed. It's important to note that this wasn't a careless lapse in judgment or a glaring missed opportunity. Similar situations can be observed when reviewing the onboard footage of drivers who have been competing throughout the entire season. Furthermore, a few corners later, Ricciardo demonstrated a commendable defense against Fernando Alonso through the S's. So it's worth highlighting that this was only Ricciardo's 3rd race start of the year, as the Spa sprint race began behind the safety car. His initial start of the year at the Hungaroring was compromised through no fault of his own, as Zhu Guanyu collided with the rear of his AlphaTauri. Ricciardo reckoned it was his fitness rather than his hand that was weakest, meaning he had a race made up mostly of misfortune. He said, "I actually felt probably worse after the Saturday sprint race, so maybe that was just a good little warm-up for me. There's positives. The hand is no excuse. I think that was good. We did well with the timing of the return to have no hesitations or excuses. Physically, it's definitely a tougher race. I still felt okay, we were just limited with damage." Ricciardo's self-criticism is understandable, considering his exceptional racecraft has rarely faltered in the past. Even during his most challenging times at McLaren, he could consistently rely on his racecraft to execute impressive opening laps or seize rare opportunities, as demonstrated in Mexico City last year. There is little evidence to suggest that Ricciardo's time off has suddenly made him an outlier on the F1 grid, and while he may not be performing at his customary peak, his move on Stroll showcased that his racecraft remains on par with many drivers who have been active throughout the year. As he noted himself after coming close to putting AlphaTauri into Q3, the one-lap stuff felt pretty good. This is a sentiment that wasn't frequently expressed during his time at McLaren. There is little cause for concern that with a few more proper race starts and wheel-to-wheel battles that are bound to be commonplace in such a tightly contested midfield, Ricciardo won't shake off the race rust and return to delivering his trademark maneuvers, with fewer of the minor lapses in close combat that led to his frustration in Austin. Lawson's performance compared to Tsunoda's had its similarities, as Zandvoort, for example, presented a unique challenge, with Lawson stepping in on short notice in tricky conditions. At Monza, he qualified just over a tenth and a half behind Tsunoda, though it's worth noting Tsunoda left some time on the table and he himself felt he could have done better. Singapore and Suzuka marked high points for Lawson, as he gave away a bit to Tsunoda but not much. This was especially impressive given his limited experience. However, Qatar, with only one practice session, was a disappointing note to conclude his 5-race stint on, according to Lawson's own admission, and this is where the key difference lies. In the very limited sample size available, there wasn't much to distinguish between Lawson and Ricciardo. The notable contrast is that one was a rookie thrust into the middle of the season, while the other is an 8-time winner with over a decade in F1, and in this context, Ricciardo is justified in acknowledging that significant impact Lawson has made. Nonetheless, it's important to recognize that Tsunoda has fundamentally been the quicker AlphaTauri driver this season when compared to all three teammates, including Nick de Vries. Although it hasn't always translated into results due to various factors like bad luck or execution, Tsunoda has shown his speed. The announcement of Tsunoda and Ricciardo as AlphaTauri's 2024 drivers, while Ricciardo was still sidelined and Lawson was performing impressively in his role, raised some eyebrows. As expected, 34-year-old Ricciardo emphasized the time on his side aspect of the 21-year-old Lawson situation. At the end of the day, unless Ricciardo's performance once he's settled significantly outshines what he achieved at McLaren, it's improbable that Red Bull will be drawing the same comparisons to Lawson as the rest of the world likely will. Tsunoda mentioned in Austin that Ricciardo has been helping him with his emotional control, underscoring Ricciardo's role as an experienced and cooperative driver, precisely the type you'd want to have in your roster if you had the luxury of fielding 4 drivers across 2 F1 teams. If Ricciardo comes close to his pre-McLaren form, he poses more of a threat to Sergio Perez or even Tsunoda's position than he's potentially blocking Lawson from an F1 seat, particularly if Red Bull views Lawson as a significant future asset. Despite all the other factors at play and the various circumstances, it's undeniable that Lawson has, at the very least, eliminated Ricciardo's ability to attribute any underperformance to rustiness. This leaves Ricciardo in the peculiar position of facing an unexpected and formidable benchmark, even though he might never actually compete directly against Lawson on the track. What do you think? Could Ricciardo be sacked from AlphaTauri unless he improves in these last few races? Let us know down in the comments below, and we will see you in the next Racing Zone video.